Hello, everyone. So I wanted to talk about three topics really that have been in the news recently. So we'll start with Bernie Sanders' Stop Bezos Act, which was legislation he introduced at the beginning of this month, and the bill has a right wing framing on purpose. To kind of appeal to Republicans and make the point. I think it makes the point about a living wage in kind of a way that they're gonna take to, because what this bill does in essence, when you break it down, this bill it shrinks the size of government, so it's pretty much conservative in nature. So I'm going to go to CNN and let's kind of like read about what the bill is doing. Then I'll break it down a little bit more detailed. As promised, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a bill Wednesday that would tax Amazon, Wal-Mart, and other big companies whose workers collect public assistance. Named the Stop Bad Employers by Zeroing Out Subsidies, or the Stop Bezos Act after Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, Sanders' bill would levy a tax on large companies equal to the value of public benefits that their workers receive. He argues that if employers paid a living wage, taxpayers would save $150 billion a year on the government assistance programs, including food stamps, Medicaid, and public housing. We do not believe that taxpayers should have to expend huge sums of money subsidizing profitable corporations owned by some of the wealthiest people in this country. That's what a rigged economy is all about, said Sanders, who introduced the bill with California Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat, a Justice Democrat, by the way. The independent senator from Vermont recently asked Amazon workers to tell him about their work conditions. He shared a few examples from workers who said that they make only $11 an hour, $13.25 an hour, which is not enough to live on. Excuse me. Sanders also lashed out Wednesday at Burger King, McDonald's, and American Airlines for paying wages so low that their workers have to sign up for government benefits. Now, Amazon attacked Bernie, saying that he was inaccurate and misleading, and he responded, and he was pretty accurate in his response and gave real numbers. Amazon was saying that Bernie was including people that worked there part-time or for a short period of time, but look, man, the point is this: when you're Amazon, when you're like a company that's owned by literally the richest person in the world, I don't care who you are or how short of a time you work there. You should make a minimum wage that's also a living wage. This shouldn't be that hard to understand. But I want to read just one other part of this article, because it's going to lead into kind of the main point that I want to make. So the bill would create, let me try and find exactly where I'm supposed to read this. Okay, I was right. The bill would create powerful incentives for employers to shy away from hiring low-income workers who are more likely to qualify for Medicaid, food stamps, or housing assistance, said a report from Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. So, and CNN is saying that this is a left-leaning organization. I'm not familiar with them, but I'll take them at their word. Also, it may lead some companies to pressure their employees not to sign up for benefits. So, this is what I take issue with. So people are arguing it's going to discourage corporations from hiring poor people, basically. And I think it's this framing of corporations wielding all the power. It makes people in this country distrustful of politicians and the media, and it makes them disillusioned by this whole system that we live in, because it's basically like, oh yeah, the corporations are going to threaten not to hire people that would have to go on these government assistance programs if this law was passed, because then they would have to cover the cost. Look, we're talking about if you get $300 in food stamps and you work at Amazon, Amazon's gonna be taxed $300. That's what we're talking about. It's 100% tax on these government assistance programs that people get. And look, some people that they just don't make enough money to live on these jobs, and you gotta do what you gotta do, right? And people will work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, whatever it is. But the point that Bernie is making is if you work for Amazon, if you work for Walmart, these big corporations, you obviously can afford to pay your workers more. So it's unfair that their workers end up having to go on government assistance programs because that goes the taxpayers have to take that burden. So it's completely reasonable to me that these companies should cover that, and that's the point that Bernie's making. Is like if you had paid these people a living wage, I wouldn't be put in a position where I think, yeah, we should try and make you bail out the taxpayers. I mean, this is what it is. It's a bailout for the taxpayers for once, and it's always so controversial with something like this, like trying to help everyday people. But if we ever want to bail out Wall Street, no big deal, right? So yeah, I mean, it should really appeal to Republicans because you're shrinking these government assistance programs, in the sense that less people will have to take from taxpayer money in doing so. So I just wanted to bring that up, and it hasn't really gained that much traction. Like when it first came out, people were talking about it, but I think it's kind of died down now. So I'd like to try and keep the word going with this, and hopefully other people will try and support this legislation and push it through. So then we go to Ted Cruz versus Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke is running for Senate. He's running against Ted Cruz, and they had their first debate recently, which I watched, and they talked about a lot of different topics. I want to focus on mainly one. I'll bring up another briefly, I guess. But so they're asked about this killing of an unarmed black man, and this is. Let me just preface by saying, like this is probably the most blatant example of injustice that I've seen in at least recent months. But like, how can you? Okay, so let me just the killing of Botham John, I believe his name is, by Officer Amber Geiger. Cruz said as a response to what Beto had said, Beto O'Rourke said that the officer should be fired. And Ted Cruz thinks that that's a mistake. She's been charged with manslaughter. She thought she was entering her own apartment and that Botham John was a intruder, and she shot him dead. It should be so obvious. Like, no matter how you try and examine what happened in this incident and whatever scenario you paint, like, she was in the wrong. Like, I don't see how you could say that she was not in the wrong. And Ted Cruz is like, Beto O'Rourke is always trying to blame the officer. Man, Ted Cruz. But you know what? Whatever. If you want to look at it at another case or something, I'm sure Beto O'Rourke is very sound-minded and he looks at these things, objectively. But when it comes to this, like how can you really sit back and be like, well, wait a minute now, we don't know if the officer was doing something wrong? No, she was. Because here's the thing. That's her own story, was that she thought she was going into her own apartment and that she saw this black guy and that she thought he was an intruder, so she shot him. It's not even as if, like, she was looking for a suspect or something and she got the wrong apartment. She was off duty when she killed this guy. So she was honestly, like, when you look at her mugshot, I don't want to be too judgmental, but like she may have been, high on something and just out of her mind. I don't know what it is, but look, if this wasn't a police officer, if this was just some random person who thought that they were going into their own apartment and then ran into some guy in his own home and then shot that guy in his own home, if that person who killed him wasn't a cop, we would not be having this conversation. It wouldn't even be a question. So, just absolutely ridiculous. But they've already done character assassination on the victim, and they're saying that they found weed in his apartment, and as if that's a reason to kill this guy who you weren't even supposed to be in his apartment in the first place. And Ted Cruz, I think what Ted Cruz, because he's just such a smarmy politician and so fake and plastic. It's just like I can't read a single emotion on the guy, to be honest, half the time. I think he's still somewhat intelligent though, and he knows how to play to his base at the end of the day, and he understands that if you say anything against law enforcement, then his base is going to go away. So he knows what issues he has to cling to his base on. But they asked him, or in the same debate, had you lost your integrity, because he's all buddy with Trump, and Trump attacked Cruz's wife and his dad. And Cruz basically said, I put all that aside to work with Trump on policy. Yeah. And he painted it as if, we're doing great things. You're not doing great things. I know you may think you're doing great things, but the facts show something different. But he just knows exactly how to play politics. But I think at the same time he is, not very well liked. And that's why this race is a toss-up now. I mean, it's in Texas. It should be kind of a given for Ted Cruz, but now it seems that it could be a toss-up, which says a lot about the direction the country's going in, I would say. They also talked about taking a knee during the national anthem, and Ted Cruz just, he did the classic right-wing smear, nothing, special. He's saying how that's disrespectful to the troops and law enforcement when you take a knee during the national anthem. Okay, so first of all, you're not listening to what they're saying. It's about the people that take a knee. It's about police brutality. They say that's what it's about. And you know what? You may disagree on that issue, but you don't get the right to say that, that's what they're doing. That's not what they're trying to do at all. And I just told you about that incident with Botham Jane being shot, or Botham John, sorry. So, if you can't see that, I don't know what to say to you. You might have a morality problem. But, regardless, don't just smear your opponent and say they're trying to disrespect the troops and law enforcement, because that's not the case at all. Protesting police brutality does not necessarily make you against all cops. It just doesn't. So they just don't. I think that someone like Ted Cruz might be smart enough that he knows the nuance of that, but he's just being purposefully misleading. It's just a straw man point, because that's not what they're saying at all. So I guess let's go to the Supreme Court now. Brett Kavanaugh, his nomination to the Supreme Court is pretty much under fire right now, because there's allegations that he attempted to rape someone when he was in high school. So the person who was the victim in this situation, she wrote a letter. She wrote a few letters actually over the summer, and one in July got to Dianne Feinstein, and she kept it secret, and I don't necessarily begrudge her that, because the victim wanted to remain confidential, pretty much, and then somehow it got out. So the victim pretty much decided to um, take responsibility and just go forward, and it's to the detriment of her own personal life, honestly, because she's been getting death threats. She's moved out of her home, um, and it's not good. We're like hardly anywhere she goes now. But so she's owning up to that, and she wants to come forward. She's requested an FBI investigation, which is interesting because if Kavanaugh was innocent in this situation, he would probably be the one to do that and not her. It's very unusual, the facts surrounding this. So she wanted to testify tomorrow, Monday, and I don't know if because she's been going back and forth kind of on what she wants to do. I don't know if she will end up testifying tomorrow. Because she wanted an FBI investigation, like a probe, into this matter before she testified. And now it looks like she might be doing it without any probe. And the Republicans, they're just playing dirty tricks all over again and trying to set these arbitrary conditions and time limits, because what they want to do is just rush this process altogether. And just because they were going back and forth on when she was going to testify, so she was like, "You have until Monday now. You got to do it Monday, or that's it." Well, no, you're just setting that arbitrarily. You don't need that. We don't need to be rushing any of this, and I'll get to more reasons for that in a bit. It makes sense to have an FBI probe, and that's because you're going to have just a more objective view of the whole thing. If you have just one person, one side of the story testify in a situation like this, it's just not going to have the impact that people would want it to. You need to have an examination of both sides, which I get that some people might be upset about that. I mean, this is a rape allegation, and it almost seems like you're de facto minimizing the female side of that. But in a law setting like this, it's not a court, obviously, but I think you just need to have both sides. You need to be objective as possible. The person, there was another person with Kavanaugh during this incident, Mark Judge, who was accused of participating in some way, and he refused to testify. He also had a really weird YouTube page of it's like snippets of music videos featuring young girls, and just very weird. He was posting pictures of younger girls, and this guy is refusing to testify. And again, I'll just say, they're trying to rush this whole process, the Republicans, and it's because they're just flailing, trying to get this guy in, and probably before the midterms, because they fear that Democrats are going to have big wins. So it's completely partisan, but they don't want to admit that it's partisan, of course. So policy that Kavanaugh is bad on, because I don't want to just tell you that, he's pretty much he attempted to rape someone and that's the only reason. No, there's plenty of policy reasons that we should oppose this guy. On Roe versus Wade, he is questionable. He said, conflicting things, honestly. And the last case that he got before him regarding abortion, he ruled against abortion. So he's very questionable on Roe versus Wade, based on past comments he's made. When it comes to executive authority, he has a pretty overarching view of what the president is able to do. And he also wrote in 2009, I think, that Congress should consider passing legislation that there should be no investigation into a sitting president, like a criminal investigation or whatever. So I think, honestly, with someone like Trump in the White House, and you have a judge saying that, and Trump selected this guy to be on the Supreme Court, I don't think that's a coincidence. I mean, it could be, but it's not exactly that common to have that kind of view on executive authority that like the president can't be investigated. Like that's it seems completely ridiculous, honestly. And he's like, impeachment's always available. He wrote to kind of weasel his way out of that. Well, the thing he said if the president did something wrong, then impeachment is available. But here's the thing, and everyone knows how I feel about the Russia investigation. I agree with going after corruption. I don't necessarily agree with the Putin puppet narrative. But regardless, for things like this, in this political day and age right now, it's hard to tell who corruption. It's not always so obvious, and they hide these things. So you may not be able to know exactly what's going on with a sitting president unless you have an investigation. And for that reason, I mean, like I think Kavanaugh probably knows that. He probably just wants to basically have Republican presidents do whatever they want, and then whenever people try and call him out on it and try and look into it, then he knows that his position would be to minimize that or do away with it completely. He also said that there was a ruling towards the end of the Watergate investigation with Nixon that they were supposed to hand over those tapes, and Kavanaugh said that decision was ruled incorrectly. Kavanaugh also says that Obamacare was completely unconstitutional, which goes against precedent of the Supreme Court. They ruled that the individual mandate essentially is consistent with the laws of the land. He defended warrantless spying, like NSA spying, and said it was consistent with the Fourth Amendment. That's ridiculous. There's no way that is consistent with the Fourth Amendment. It is unconstitutional to have NSA spying of everyone, because what they're doing is collecting your metadata, your texts, anything electronic, even things that you buy. All that stuff is collected and stored in a facility in Utah, and that is not at all what the Fourth Amendment says. You need a warrant to collect people's information for a specific crime. And someone like Rand Paul, who's a libertarian Republican, understands this. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Rand Paul, but he understands that it is unconstitutional, because to just have blanket sweep of everyone's information when they haven't done anything wrong, like that is not. It's a complete abuse of governmental power, in my view, and I think that if you read the Constitution, if you read what people have said, I think it's quite obvious. He's also against net neutrality, which I don't need to get into. I've covered that a lot. It's just very, very bad for regular people and good for corporations. So, just another quick point, or two quick points. It's complete projection to me how conservatives, they pretend like they only care about laws and the Constitution, and they don't want activists on the Supreme Court. Like Ted Cruz is trying to make this point during the debate, and he doesn't realize that he's trying to put a conservative activist on the court. Or maybe he does, and he's just trying to mislead you. But as I've just gone through the list, and that wasn't even a full list of policies of Kavanaugh and what he supports, he has a viewpoint. He has a conservative viewpoint, and he's going to go on the Supreme Court. I'm perfectly willing to admit that I want, essentially, I guess, liberal or progressive activists on the court, because it's my view that when you have more left-leaning perspectives on the court, they're going to rule in a way that's going to be better for the American people. On issues of democracy and voting, there's going to be a broadening of democracy and voting rights. So I'm perfectly willing to admit that, yeah, I want progressive activists, if you will, on the Supreme Court, because that's the view that's the views that I hold, and I want to see my views represented on the Supreme Court. Um, and if they're willing to interpret the Constitution a little bit differently, and not be, to the letter, like that's the two different views, kind of. You have a constitutionalist view, which is like strictly what the document says and no interpretation, or you can interpret it as a living document, and basically try and add a modern interpretation, if you will. I'm fine with that because, listen, I think it's deluded to think that like the Constitution is just perfect. It obviously is not perfect because it's had like 20, like almost 30 amendments to it. It's obviously not perfect. And yeah, we need things that are going to update us to a more modern society and make us more democratic, in my view. So the other important point, that I want to point out is that the Republicans, they completely blocked Obama's pick for over a year. For over a year, they blocked his pick from even having a hearing. Like Kavanaugh's already gone farther than Merrick Garland did. He's had hearings. So completely ridiculous that the Republicans are trying to rush this and be like, oh, you're completely disregarding the political system that we have, the election, because Republicans just like swept in 2016. Like you're being completely ridiculous. Well, we elected Obama too, and he had a right to pick a Supreme Court nominee. Antonin Scalia passed away, so he picked someone to replace him. It's not that hard to understand. But they didn't even have a hearing about it. Like you can say what you want about Merrick Garland, whether he was good or not, and whether he would have been a good pick for the Supreme Court, whatever. If you want to have that conversation, fine. My view of him, based on what I know, is that he was more or less pretty centrist. So, better than a right-winger, but yeah, not that great. But they didn't even have a hearing. They were blocking everything the whole time.